I'm so grateful for your open-heartedness, much more than people realize. What I'm able to say is because of your energy. Swami Kriyananda taught us to speak in a certain way. He trained us to speak in a certain way, which was just very much opening ourselves to whatever was there to be said. And after many years of this opportunity, I've really come to see it as that the magnet is in front of me, and the power station is behind me, which is up behind and above, the greater reality of which we are all a part, and I just am the conduit through it. That it's really what is, what your own hearts and souls are asking for is what occurs to me to say. I'm not perfectly by any means, but that's my best chance. I had a very vivid experience of what that intuition was about when I was very much beginning in the life that I've lived. It would have been in the early 80s. And a friend of mine named Shivani, she and I were peers. She's an American girl, but she subsequently moved to Ananda in Assisi, Italy, and so has been there for the last 30-some years. But we were both just younger. Guess what? Younger. And we were doing a lecture tour together. And because we worked together in a lot of what we were doing in the ashram at that point in our community, Shivani had a tremendous interest in healing. And in fact, she's finishing a massive, magnificent book about life force healing, which you will be coming to a bookstore near you in probably a year before it's out. But she was very interested in Yogananda's healing techniques, of which there are a plethora. But because she was so steeped in it, I never, I wasn't that interested, and there was no point in it, because she was doing it. So we're on this lecture tour together, and I was very early. I mean, we'd hardly ever traveled, and we were traveling up the West Coast, and we were in Longview, Washington, I even remember, and her husband, who was a contractor, had a big job, and he got in trouble on the job, as sometimes happens with contractors. He basically called his wife and said, help, 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 help. So she just got on a plane and left the tour. And we had 6 weeks of programs, and they were alternating. She would do one night, I would do the next, and all of her classes were on healing. And there she left. And she left me her notes, which made no sense to me at all. I couldn't figure out anything. So I wasn't entirely ignorant. But I stood in front of this group in Longview, Washington. I remember it perfectly. It was a small room. And I started talking in the way that I just do about, but the subject was healing. And it was very interesting because I could feel in the room that people wanted me to follow through on some particular idea that I had, but I had said everything I knew. And I was very aware of the fact that I had to run it with my mind, because I didn't have the storehouse of understanding that would give me the library that I could pull from and just run it from my intuition. It was a very extremely positive experience at that early stage, because you always are asking the balance between study and intuition, and how much can I just know, how much can I just cruise and follow my feelings, how much do I really have to have myself organized and have my notes in order. I mean, everybody's different. But it's always that balance point that we're looking for. One part of us just wants to float effortlessly and easily into heavenly realms, and the other part wants to get really organized before we even set out on that journey. And these are all the different forces that are always pulling us, just one direction or another direction. When I was 18 years old, I actually grew up, I lived in El Paso, Texas until I was 15, so Texas born and raised. And then we moved to California, and I've never left California since then. I've never lived anywhere but California. And I, from a very, very young age, I I always wanted to know what was true. I had a very fierce sort of interest in what was true. And being from a comfortable family with lots of opportunities, intellectually oriented education, professional, all that sort of thing. And I was school smart, which is not the same as being smart, trust me. I knew how to do school somehow, so I could do school without much effort, which of course would open doors to being able to do lots of other things. But there wasn't anybody around me who was asking or answering the only question I thought was worth answering, which was how to be happy. And a corollary of that as a romantic young girl was how to have love. I really wanted to have love. And I thought, well, maybe I'll have a dozen children because then I'll have lots of love, is what I really wanted. But even the desire for love was really the desire for happiness. Swami Kriyananda has this interesting statement. He says, love is bliss in action. When you feel that kind of joy, you immediately start giving that joy to everyone around you, and the very act of sharing joy is really the greatest act of love that there is, because that's what everyone else is also looking for. And when you have that inside of you and you're able to put that vibration, to share that vibration with others, then everything begins to change. But nowhere in my schooling, even I went to a prestigious university. I actually lasted about 2 weeks. I paid attention for 2 weeks. And then I discovered that they had lots of knowledge, but they didn't have any wisdom. And it was demonstrated to me even by my own teachers. And so I partied for the rest of the year. That was my libertine period. It was a very brief period, but it was notable. I was sharing this with someone the other day, the Grateful Dead, which of course became very well known later. I mean, I went to college in 1965, so this is a long time ago. I was in Palo Alto for college, and the Grateful Dead was forming, and they were forming right there. And so they weren't known, but they were beginning to be known, and every Friday they would play somewhere. And it wasn't thousands of people, it was like 20 of us or 30 of us, and I'd find out where they were and just go up and dance. I mean, that just seemed to me like as much more worthwhile than my university classes, which were endlessly boring. So by the end of the year, I'd actually flunked out. I think I was reinstated. I vaguely remember doing something, finishing a paper or something, but I never went back and never thought about it again. Because as soon as I got out of school that year, I found friends who were beginning to study Indian teaching. And this again, 1966 by now. And everything, especially in California, was just popping. And Palo Alto's right near San Francisco, and it was just blowing open, and every Indian Swami was coming to San Francisco, and it was just a really big thing. And so I started studying books. And there was no internet then. You had to buy books. You had to go to a bookstore and buy books, which we did. And there were 3 things that were said to me. Let's see. Oddly enough, oh yes, there were 3 things that I remember reading that just put a line in the sand. There was before and there was after. And everything about my life has been after. And the 3 things, the first one was, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. I was 18 years old and I always thought about myself. What else was there to think about? It was just like such a completely novel thought to me. I wasn't really selfish, but I was always calculating my own advantage. And my own advantage was what would be the most fun. I wasn't very disciplined or reliable. I was just always thinking about how I could make my life more fun, always. Oh, whoa, that good catch. Oh, it was wind? Okay, let's just hope for the best. Okay? So, the first one was don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. The second one was, what you experience today is the result of what you did yesterday. Now that really spun out into the law of karma, and it goes way, way, way bigger than that. But I just got the aphorism. And it was the first time anybody had actually told me something that I really wanted to know. I mean, like, isn't it obvious that how you feel today is what you did yesterday? But there was a whole world beyond that that I was introduced to. And the third thing, which I thought was Indian teaching, which, because I was raised Jewish, so I didn't know anything about the Bible, the New Testament, was actually from St. John, but I thought it was some great sadhu in India who said it. Perfect love casts out fear. And I was I like to use the word high-strung. There's lots of other words that you could use that are not quite as delicate as that, but let's just say fear was a big issue for me. Just always tense and always a little worried about what might happen next. And I functioned very well, but my entire personality was driven just by trying to sort of stay ahead of this. Free-floating anxiety, oddly enough, is a phrase I only just recently learned, but that's exactly what it was. And here it said, love is the opposite of fear. And it's taken me the rest of my life, and I'm still really working on it. Love is the opposite of fear. I would think preparation, having yourself organized, having money. I would have lots of things, having 12 children so that, somebody would always love you and you would always have someone to love. But it's just love, just as simple as that. So in the life that I went on with, just to sort of finish this cycle, I immersed myself in these teachings for the next 3 years. I read all these books about saints, Catholic saints, missionary saints, self-sacrificing saints, Indian sadhus living in caves, just everything, because I was still just this little American girl just living this basic American life, and I had such a intense desire to learn something that I knew was there to be learned. And when I was 22, also in Palo Alto at Stanford University, somebody invited Swami Kriyananda, who's an American, but he has an Indian name because he's a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, who many of you know from Autobiography of a Yogi. And he was starting this community up in the hills 4 hours above San Francisco, and it was a really changing time. So this fraternity at Stanford that was really had a big party reputation, and they were such a big party fraternity that they had this huge tent, so they'd have more room for their parties than in their place. So they invited Swami Kriyananda to come and give a talk at this big tent outside the Beta Chi fraternity house. And we'd had friends who told us, a friend of mine who was part of my circle, she met Swamiji and she said to me these words, "I've met a real teacher," she said. And then she said, "And I think you'll like him," which truer words were never spoken. So I went, and it was paradoxical, because I was with people who were there, but they weren't real receptive to what was happening, and it was actually bleachers. They put bleachers inside this tent. So we sat on we sat as far from the Swami as we could possibly sit. And so we were way up at the top of this thing, which turned out to be actually quite good because we had a perfect view. Swami Kriyananda walked into that room, and he was 44 at that time. He died at 87, so I kind of knew him all the way through. 22 years older than me, twice my age at that point. And he walked into the room, and I was as far away from him as I could be and still be inside the tent. And he was there, and he was here. That's the only way I can describe it. He was as close to me. He was just right there. And he went through me and went out through the tent. I don't know how I knew any of this. I was totally surprised, but it was there was no question in my mind that it was happening. And then, of course, I learned more things later. I knew a little of it. It was his aura, the vibration of energy that people emanate. We feel it all the time. You meet people and they're very attractive to you, or they're not, you know, or they just kind of pass through and you don't even notice that they're there because they don't have any magnetism coming out of them, or the aura is so small that it just makes no impact. A friend of mine met Bill Clinton when he was president, or at the time, and my friend is very strong-minded, and he heard, you know, about the aura of this man, and he swore that he would hold his own no matter what. He was a college student. I don't know what the circumstances were. So Bill Clinton comes up and shakes his hand. He said as soon as his hand's like that, my friend said he became Bill Clinton's slave. He would have done anything the man wanted him to do. And he said he felt completely just enveloped in the man's aura. Of course, you know, he was a world figure, and we have lots of stories like that. You know, you see people on stage sometimes. I saw this. I'm not very fond of, I'm kind of an old curmudgeon. I'm not very fond of a lot of modern kind of music. I'm too much of a Puritan, I guess. I don't even want to go there. But anyway, nonetheless. So, but friends of mine were doing a recital, and it was a mixed different thing. And so one of the dances was with these women, young women, and the whole theme was seduction, I think. And well, I think it was literally called The Morning After or something like that. Anyway, whatever it was, my ministerial self, you know, I have to try hard to be accepting because I don't want to just have all my young friends just put me in the corner. But so I'm there and I'm trying hard to accept, and they're doing something or no, what it was. It didn't appeal to me. There were like 4 dancers. 3 of them had a typical dancer's body. One of them was about maybe 40 pounds heavier than the other girls, which when you're wearing skin tight and not much of it, you know, that seems like a lot. I didn't notice any of those other 3 girls. That woman who did not look like she was supposed to look for what she was doing, she had so much magnetism. She just was, she had, I said later to my friends, if I could move like that, why would you move like that? You know? But it was her choice, and she loved it, and that's what she was doing. But there was nothing held her back. And you didn't even notice the other girls. Vaguely, you knew they were sort of moving around sometimes around that one. So we all know, I'm using that as an example, we all know that it's the energy that we emanate that people really respond to. And it's the energy that we emanate that actually determines our fate, because of the chakras and because of the kundalini and because of the karma in the chakras. And these are all very big subjects about which I've given countless classes, and you can just Google my name and you can find all the stuff that I've done if you're interested. But going back to this, Swami Kriyananda walked into this room, the tent, and he had an aura like I'd never seen before. And I'd met other Swamis by that point at the Vedanta Society in various places, but he just had an aura like I'd never seen before. And it had no edge. And that's what I realized, all of us, I mean by an edge, no boundary. There was just no boundary. His energy just moved. And I was talking a minute ago about, you know, sort of you're the magnet, the source is behind me, and I just open my mouth and do what I do here. But it's the more we are not resisting that force that's always trying to come through us, just the bigger and freer and more powerful we get. And the more powerful we get, the more joyful we get. And because of that kind of power, not power over people, but just that feeling of the flow of energy. And the more joyful, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself, isn't it? And that's when that classic question, why did God make the universe, which you can't answer unless you're God, which we are, but you know, we don't know it, so we're not aware of it. But God is defined in the Indian teaching as Satchidananda, ever existence, ever conscious, ever new joy. And they answer sometimes well, the divine wanted to enjoy itself through many, and the obvious answer to that is he's not enjoying himself through very many, you know. But Swami Kriyananda's answer was, well, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself, isn't it? I mean, you just find a good restaurant. What's the first thing you do? Well, nowadays you take a picture and you send it out, you know. But you tell everyone. And the next time you take all your friends with you, because it was fun when you were doing it by yourself, but it's more fun when you share it, isn't it like that? So, as I was saying at the beginning, Swami described love as bliss in action. So when you have something that you adore and you want everybody else to have it with you, I mean, what would you call that? I mean, that's an act of love, isn't it? Because you would be happier if you could have the wonderful experience I had, so let me help you have that experience. And that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about love. We're talking about the active willingness to serve and to uplift and to share, and not just to hoard for ourselves. And we hoard for a lot of reasons, not only because we're selfish. We hoard just because we are afraid, isn't that so? When I did that first year at university, the year, basically, sometimes people will come and talk to me about college or their kids going to college, and I say, look, I'm not the right one, because I didn't like it and I never did it. So I don't want to spoil the well for those who are interested in doing that. But that first week, what they did was they invited all the freshmen to come for a week. And let's see. And so for a whole week on campus, there was just 18-year-olds. Most of us were on our first adventure. And it was a good idea, fundamentally, because you could then find the library and find your classes and all those things. But it was an amazing experience to me. We fell into what was absolute social gridlock, because everyone was afraid to be the one to initiate, and it might not be welcome. You know, it was awful, just unbelievable tension. And I had an interesting idea, which I have followed ever since. I decided somebody has to break the gridlock. Now, I couldn't say that I really loved these people. I hardly knew them. But I said somebody has to pretend that they are not afraid. And I learned much later that was a very sophisticated yogic technique to affirm a reality in the hope of being able to do it. But I just started pretending that I wasn't afraid. And as I look back on it, I realized that was an act of love. And the only way that I was able to offer that was to overcome the fear. What was keeping me from reaching out to all those people? What was keeping them from reaching out to me? You know, what if I'm not welcome? What if I'm not liked? What if I'm not accepted? Whatever it might be. And the odd thing was, I was quite afraid. I was no more really secure. I'm just a very practical person, and I thought somebody has to do something. And I've spent all my life within Ananda, my adult life within Ananda, and I have one friend, besides my biological sister, who's a friend also, of course, who's outside of the community, and that's the woman I met that first week at college. It's like almost as soon as I decided not to be afraid, boom, we became friends, and we're still friends to this day. You know? Now, I'm bringing these, what sounds like very big ideas, which is also, you know, big in the Bible, St. John in the Bible, and just trying to help us to understand. Now, this is what it's really important to know. It's we think that change happens in gigantic implements, gigantic units. You know, it's kind of an all or nothing sort of thing. But the actual transformation of consciousness is a moment-by-moment experience. Paramahansa Yogananda has a wonderful saying, which I love quoting. He said, take care of the minutes, and incarnations will take care of themselves. And it is really true, because when you look back on it, our lives are just a series. It's always now. I can toss out this word because I enjoy saying it, that I've been doing this for 50 years. Doesn't that sound like a really, really big, big number? When I was 20, and I would have thought of 50, it just was unfathomable to me. How could you do anything for 50 years? It just seemed crazy. But now that I've done it, it doesn't even exist, except that I can use things like 1966. Kesava and I have been friends for quite some time now, and we are almost 2 generations apart. I'm his honorary grandmother. I'm not even his mother, okay? I'm his grandmother. And our cultural references are just so far apart. He'll just make some reference to something and I won't have the foggiest idea what he's talking about. I'll say something that is so obvious and he'll just stare at me like, what are you talking about? Finally, I asked him, what year were you born? Because once I got a year, 1994, in case you're curious, and 1994, and I thought, my God, you were in the womb. I was in the courtroom defending Ananda in this terrible lawsuit that we were in. It's like, all of a sudden, that's the only time I could actually see the reality of time, which is when I was doing this, you were doing that. When Swami Kriyananda was in his probably late 70s at that point, he came to visit the elementary school that we have in the community that I live in Palo Alto. Now we have a K through high school. At that time we just had a K through 8 school, Living Wisdom School we call it. And Keshav is a high school teacher in our school. In case you're interested in education, you can ask him. But this little girl was watching Swamiji, and he looked elderly. He had white hair, and he looked his age. But he doesn't vibe any particular age. So she kept staring at him. She was just very confused. And finally, she was a very feisty little child, and she walked right up and she put herself quite close to his face and kind of peered at him like that and said, "How old are you anyway?" Just like that. And he looked at her very thoughtfully and said, "Well, let's just put it this way. When you were an old woman, I was a little boy." And she sort of thought about that for a minute, and then she kind of caught the wave on it and was very satisfied and went sailing off. So it's always just now. It's always happening just now, isn't it? And we think about the future, and we obsess about the past, but those are just energy forms that they don't exist, really. The only ever actuality we ever have is what our consciousness is right now. And that's why the only thing that we can ever do to really change ourselves has to be right now. And it's not, what professions we get or how much money we have or the circumstances. It's what's going on inside of us, because that's all you ever experience. Michael Singer has written a couple of best-selling books, and they're very nice books. I highly recommend them, and I have to give him credit because this is such a great idea, and I might be messing it up, but this is basically what he says. He talks about the fact that there's always a conversation going on in your head, which we think is us. We think it's me talking. But if you think about it, there's also somebody listening, right? There's somebody talking, and then there's somebody listening. And his whole, and he's a very highly educated spiritual person, but he's just really hit it perfectly with these books, which people are reading. It's Untethered Soul and The Surrender Experiment, if I have the names correctly. But he says what you have is, the one who is always listening is you, and the other one is your roommate. And, if your roommate drank a lot and took drugs, you wouldn't really listen to your roommate all that much, would you? I mean, if your roommate just didn't really have a totally reliable character, you wouldn't take it so seriously. But we take it so seriously, don't we? We're always just thinking that whatever's going on in our head has to be listened to. That's why when I was 18, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. Well, what else is there to think about except me, me, me? I had to literally, I didn't know then about japa, about chanting and other practices. I learned them later. I literally would concentrate on things outside me just to keep my mind keep my roommate from talking to me all the time about my own place in the world. I would count light bulbs, I would just do anything just to break it. And then once I was conscientious about breaking the habit, we just allow ourselves so much of the time to just keep repeating these patterns. And see, here's where the problem comes. And this gets esoteric, and we're not going to, we can touch it a little. I don't know how much we'll get through it, but the chakra system, which is very much talked about in yoga, and there's lots of different ways that people think about it. So what I'm offering you is my lineage, which is what I said earlier. This is how Swami Kriyananda learned it from Yogananda and taught it to me, basically. Because we are identified with the things that happen to us, and because we are identified with the things that we do. We can observe other people doing things, but it's not the same as when we do them. And because we have that basic identification with ourselves. Now, I mean, the obvious thing is, well, of course, why wouldn't I? But that's a complicated question. That's the ego self versus the infinite self. And our perspective is generally on the part of us that's identified with our physical body, and therefore with all of the individuality that presents, instead of concentrating at the spiritual eye, where we become identified with our relationship with the greater reality. It was just what I was saying about the hands and the hands. Just we're either obsessed or it's a point of view. But because of that, whenever we do anything, whenever you think, whenever you act, when you have a feeling about something, it represents a certain vibration of awareness, where every time we make a decision and every time we respond to life, we're actually answering some very important questions. The primary ones are one you've already heard me ask: what causes suffering and what brings happiness? And we always make decisions to avoid suffering and to have happiness. But many of those decisions are really stupid. So instead of actually bringing us happiness, they tend to perpetuate our suffering. But we never do that on purpose. And my little mantra, which I repeat very often, is it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I'm amazed about the things that seem like a good idea at the time, but they did, or else I wouldn't have done them, because I don't want to suffer. I want to be happy. But every time we do anything, it registers as an answer to that question. Let's use extreme examples. Having power over people, that's what makes me happy. So I'm going to be a dictatorial sort of boss, or I'm going to get to be president of the United States and have power over everyone, or I'm going to tyrannize my children or tyrannize my employees because I think it makes me happy to do that. And that is an answer to the question on a certain vibratory level, somewhere between just complete depravity and Jesus Christ, full avatar self-realization freedom. And if you just think about it, everything that we do falls somewhere on that spectrum, doesn't it? And that spectrum is the chakras. I mean, I'm making it horizontal, the chakras are vertical. It's a little more subtle than that, because it's not like lower chakras are bad and upper chakras are good. But nonetheless, there is a vibratory, it's registered. So every time we do something, the energy stays with us. And in the Sanskrit word for it is vritti, and vritti means whirlpool. And you have some thought in the center, and then you have all these actions that go around it. That's a woman friend of mine. She was very beautiful. She just was born with a lovely figure, beautiful face, fantastic hair, marvelous eyes. And she was always that beautiful. So when she was even a little child, she was beautiful. And she told me she grew up absolutely lazy, because all she had to do was walk into a room and a lot of stuff began to happen all around her. And she got a little older and became aware of what she was. she said she just got used to it. She just got used to just walking in and then watching the whole world buzz around her. I laughed and told her I was about 10 and all my friends had puberty early and I was just still as skinny as I could be and no one was paying any attention to me. So I became very funny because I had to work. Nothing happened when I just walked into the room. Everybody just went about their business. But, you know, that fact, every time she did that, there was a center point of, I don't have to do anything, the world just comes to me. And this circle of energy, and she built a circle of energy, and that becomes a vritti in our chakras, and it becomes a magnetic field that constantly pulls us. This is why we set out to do one thing and we end up doing something else. Because our energy is flowing through like this, and it gets those whirlpools, just like if you think of a river running, and how the river's heading to the sea, but some of the water gets sucked into this whirlpool. And this water never gets to the sea, it just keeps spinning in this whirlpool. And some of the energy gets to the sea, but so much of it gets sucked off. That's us. That's why, I suppose, if you're anything like me, you can make decisions, make resolutions, and then oddly enough, when the moment comes, something else eats your consciousness effectively. It's just one of those vrittis just draws, just like you're heading for the sea, but you got sucked up into one of those whirlpools. So what we have to understand, as impressive and dynamic as this is, that it's just an energy pattern. And energy patterns can be shifted by what? By other energy patterns. But every time we do anything, we think, we act, we feel, we worry, we love, we give, we hoard, we suffer, we rejoice. It adds energy at whatever vibration we're living in that moment. And so there's no such thing as anything, and I think this is the good news. Some people think this is the awful news. There's no such thing as a time when it doesn't matter what you do. Because what you are today is the result of what you did yesterday. And what you will be tomorrow is the result of what you do today. And so we want to sort of undo all those energy patterns all at once. And there's lots of techniques that people talk for, busting up all that energy. But the best way to bust up that energy is to, oh dear, behave differently, think differently, feel differently. But we can't do that just like that because of those vrittis. But every time we have enough awareness to make a decision, we just try to be a little better than we were. And just move that dot, this little handful of energy, instead of landing here, is going to land here. This little bit of self-concern is just going to give way to a little bit more giving. Just as simple as that. You will be amazed. And instead of, it's so popular these days to concentrate on what is dark. But the fact of the matter is, what we have to concentrate on, and believe me, in this world today, there's plenty dark. You don't have to look very far. I prefer the word shadow, because shadow is merely blocked light. And there is no such thing as dark. There's just places where the light is blocked. But there's plenty of places right now where the shadow is showing. But is that what we want for our consciousness? Because we're just an energy pattern. We're just what we concentrate on. The light has not been diminished by the presence of shadow. In fact, you might say there has to be a great deal of light for there to be this much shadow. And every time, and do not ever underestimate your power. Ever underestimate your power, because your world itself will be changed if we simply choose the light. There are so many, there is all this shadow in the world. Everyone I talk to is worried, and we should be worried. God knows, really, God alone knows where we're going and what's going to happen next. It's very uncertain times. But if we take care of the minutes, the incarnations will take care of themselves. If we just start watching ourselves, and every time we have a chance, just do a little better than your worst. Doesn't sound like much, but if you consistently do a little better than your worst, time will pass and you won't recognize yourself, because all that energy will just move and you'll become what you aspire to become. I speak from experience. I can promise you on this one. I can promise you. And it has never been more urgent. This is not a time in the world when we can just kind of float in the middle. The world is polarizing like this. And everyone who has any understanding of the power of light, we have a profound responsibility. And it is the antidote. Perfect love casts out all fear. And now, of course, divine love, as Keshava was singing, the idea, Yogananda talked a great deal about Divine Mother. And it's very simple what he was talking about. He was talking about the infinite compassion that is always there for us. We are never alone. If we could see it, we're surrounded by angels, literally. Right here, right next to you where you can't see them. We are never alone. There are beings from the astral world who are showering us with with light possibilities. And as many as received him, as many as received that light flows into us. So let us be those beings. Do we have a question or two before we go to a little more music before we're done? Does anyone have a question on either what I was talking about or something else? Okay. Atul, is that who you are? Yes. Uh-huh.
I really admire the way you speak.
Could you speak just a little louder?
I really admire the way that you speak so fluidly, without concern of any sort of nervousness or anything like that, and it feels like we're just having a conversation. How did you develop that skill?
I asked my mother if I came out of the womb talking. I'm not sure whether I did or not. I go to the YMCA to swim, and I like going there because there's a lot of mothers and children, and this mother comes in with this little girl. Girl is talking, and I can hear her, and she's actually interesting. She's not just jabbering. She's just interested in the world, and she has lots of, they go all the way to the swimming pool. The girl talks every time except when she's underwater. And then she comes up with a comment about being underwater. And the mother is kind of looking like this. I kind of put my arm around her and said, "It worked out for me, it'll be fine." But the actual answer to that is I have no idea. And I'm a little schizophrenic, because I'm not really schizophrenic, but I mean that I really have this split reality, because she does do that. She just gets up and talks. And she does it all the time. And every once in a while I'll see a recording and I'll think, oh, she's kind of interesting. No wonder people listen. But when she's done, I just go home, So I don't know. I think it's because I've had a very, very, very deep desire to help people. And I always wanted to do something meaningful. And I know actually this is perhaps an answer. It's not exactly what you asked. I did have that encounter with Swami Kriyananda, which it took me a year before I was able to leave what I was doing and go live where he lived. But I was on a beeline from the moment I met him. And just because of karma, I started working for him. I was his secretary and personal assistant, and I knew from the very beginning that I was witnessing a very, very unusual life, Swami's life, and that it was not meant for me. It was meant for me to observe it and share it. And so right from the beginning, I felt like I had this duty that I would just, and I right from the start. He would say things I would tell everyone, just like this. And I guess actually the actual word for that is love. I really wanted people to be happy, and I felt that what he was saying would help make them happy, and so that made me self-forgetful. A psychic told me that I used to use this gift for revolution. She actually said, quote, "I helped start the French Revolution." I did read about this woman who helped start the French Revolution with a mouth, and then repented of it. But I don't know if that was me or not. But when I read that, it was, kind of too eerily familiar. So I have a debt to pay, because I have persuaded people to do a lot of things that seemed like a good idea at the time. And so I have to balance it. It's occurred to me that someday I might not have to talk anymore. But right now she has a job and she just has to keep doing it. Yes.
I know that you're oftentimes taught to focus on the now,
Uh-huh.
but if you're a planner and always thinking ahead, and sometimes you struggle to not constantly think that far ahead, what did you use in the beginning to help you focus on the now and the moment? Were there anything?
When I was 19 and was just starting with this is I have very few unusual, well, that's not fair, that's not true. I have very few woo-woo experiences, I have a lot of intuition and I can move through things, but I was washing dishes and I was not washing dishes. I was thinking about what I was going to do after I finished washing dishes and a little bit about what I'd done before, and very small percentage of me was actually washing dishes. Most of it was trying to finish so I could do the next thing. And I heard a voice. It had a slight New York accent. And it was inside my head, but it spoke. It wasn't me, and it wasn't my roommate. It was somebody else. And it said this: "What's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another." And I thought, God speaks to me, and this is what he says, But I've never forgotten it. And it is a matter of awareness, commitment, and a conscientious determination. Okay, here's what it is. You do not change a bad habit until the continuation of that habit is worse than the imagined effort required to shift it. And you will not do it until you're suffering more by continuing than you imagine you will suffer more by trying to change. Shivani, my friend, says, don't even think about changing a habit till you're absolutely disgusted with it. That was how she put it. But it's actually true. But one has to be honest in one's introspection and pay attention to what's happening. And you simply, and I know it sounds silly, but you simply stop doing that. And you stop doing it. I use tricks. I sing, I do chants, I do affirmations, or I talk to the dishes while I wash them. Just anything to break it, because it's nothing but an energy flow. There's no rocks, there's no cars, there's nothing. It's just the direction of your energy. And you redirect your energy, and it's different. The bane of our existence is multitasking, because nothing ever gets actually done. Swami Kriyananda never did more than one thing at a time, and he was stunningly productive. And he said it was because of that. Everything he did, when he was doing it, it was the only thing that there was. And he trained himself. So first you have to decide it's important. And then, once you decide it's important, then it's really not that hard. Solutions will come to you. You probably have lots already. It's just a question of doing them. Hee. This is where we get confused between simple and easy. Because it's not easy, we think it's complex. And so then we spin in the complexity of it, thinking that somehow that will make it easier. But it isn't. It's simple, but it's not easy. And even that, just, yeah, this is hard, but it's worth doing. Okay? Let's see, we can take one more. Jenny?
You mentioned about how things are being polarized
Yeah.
more and how we should be worried about what might be coming.
Well, what's coming could be quite dramatic.
Right.
It's not, maybe if I said we should be worried, let's not. Let's
Yes.
take that one out, okay?
And so what any suggestions that you could offer of what would be in our highest good to prepare, or I feel like being the light is where we need to shine. Shine our light as much as possible, do our work in the highest regard. But is there anything more practical that you might suggest?
Well, Yogananda suggested forming communities with like-minded friends, even just small groups of you getting together. He suggested that you become as self-sufficient as you can, especially in terms of food and shelter and things like that. I mean, Ananda has done a great deal of this. Personally, I'm not in that kind of a position, but the most important thing is our consciousness. Fear attracts other fears. Fear attracts the things that you fear. Love creates a magnetic field in your aura that is protective, because then even when darker forces come in, if the aura around you is contrary to those shadow forces, then the shadow forces will be burned up by the aura that you have around you. Yogananda said his actual words are, those who love God will be protected. And it's like, what does that mean, protected? Does that mean no bad thing will happen to you, that you won't suffer, or that in the end it will all be fine, even if you're dead? Everybody's dead in the end anyway, so what does it matter in a real sense? I'm sorry, I'm a little cavalier about that one, but anyway, that's just a fact. But everything is about your magnetism. And your karma helps determine your magnetism, but your magnetism is determined, guess what? Moment by moment. And so whatever is habitual for us will become intensely habitual when stress increases. I had this, this might be helpful. Because I grew up in a Jewish family and I was born in 1947, the whole idea of the Holocaust and ending up in concentration camps and so on was just somehow, and I believe that's a past life experience of mine. I thought everybody expected to end up in a concentration camp. I've only recently found out that most of my friends don't. They were quite surprised that I did. I always thought that would happen. And I actually had this real conundrum, which was, what if, and we've all seen the movies, we're standing there and the brutal guards brutalize the person next to me. Do I throw myself into the fray, even if I'm killed or hurt? Or do I just stand there and let it happen? This was a serious moral dilemma for me. Past life memory, I don't know. Finally, when I was with Swami Kriyananda, I realized, I could ask him. You could ask him all kinds of. I miss his presence for lots of reasons, but I especially miss it because if he were here, I would ask him. But so I asked him. I described the whole thing, and his answer, because this is what he always did for me. I had a little box like this, and he would just go like that with my ideas, and I would just get a bigger picture. He said, what you're actually asking is, in a moment of crisis, what is the right thing to do? The way he put it more was, what does God want you to do? But you don't have to have that construct to understand it. What is the right action in a moment of crisis? He said, the only way you will know in a moment of crisis is if you have practiced when it was easier, making the right decisions for the right reasons, or in my case, attuning ourselves to what God wants from me. You have to practice when it's easier. And then when the stress increases, you won't be starting from nothing. You won't be just collapsing. So our world is very insecure right now. And you can, save money, buy land, stockpile food and water. You can do anything, and why not? I have these big 8 water cubes in my house, why not? And I always keep my cabinets full, and I always keep my car filled with gas. I mean, this is my little part of it. It's down 1/8 of a tank, and I'm in there filling it up again in case we have to flee. I'm ready, and if I could buy one, I'll buy 12, and just put them in the closet. But what's really the real issue, let's see, let me think what I was saying. But the real issue is to practice not being afraid. Because if we're afraid, if we're afraid of bad people, if we're afraid of physical pain, if we're afraid of other people being hurt, if we're afraid of the wrong people being elected, the good news is, guys, I hate to be the ones to break this to you, but we're not in charge. There are cosmic forces that are playing here. I like Divine Mother because she's a real sweet friend of mine. That works well for me. But one way or another, there's cosmic forces going on here. And if we think that my little universe is my little story, that's not at all true. We need to recognize we are part of a greater reality, and the more we can train ourselves to operate within that. And that's the only thing I can think of, because the rest of it, who knows? I read this wonderful book. It wasn't wonderful. It was very interesting. It was called Lucifer's Hammer. It was like published in the 70s, I think, and I'd remembered it, so I went and found it. Lucifer's Hammer was the name that was given to it's just a novel. A meteor hits the earth and, just makes everything go gablooey in a really gigantic way. And then the story is all the different people and all the different ways they related to it. It was actually extremely interesting. I highly recommend it if you're a person who likes novels, because you could see everybody had different ways of figuring it out. And you could learn a lot about who you are. The good news is we incarnated at this time on purpose because it was going to be good for us. Did we think it was going to be easy? Oh yeah, that was that problem, wasn't it? Easy and pleasurable to us means good, or good means easy and pleasurable. But from the point of view of your soul, of your higher self, it's not looking for easy and pleasurable, it's looking for victory. And you wouldn't even go to the gym and just put on the machine the weight that you can already just lift. Why would you do that? Complete waste of your time. Why would you spend a whole incarnation just not changing, not learning anything? And unfortunately, challenge is a good way to learn. So there we have it. And so the more we can practice not being afraid, I highly recommend it. It's a really good thing to do. And then alternatively, practicing when it's easier. Oh my goodness, I've used up all my time. What do you know? Let's end with a song, though. Would you sing Dare to Be Different? Okay, my friends. I think I occupy this a couple of more times. So we'll see you then, in case you was going to sing. Now.
Thank you, Asha.
My pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed her.
An event for which you are responsible.
Event for which I am responsible, exactly. Okay.
All right, as she said, this is a piece of music called Dare to Be Different. Dare to be different, dare to be free, dare to roam far like wind on the sea, fly like a gull, soar high on the air, be strong in your courage when others despair. Never in anger, never in haste. Go without pride, be never abased. Freedom is yours if freedom you give. To all give it freely, in freedom you'll live. Mountains that stand up tall to the sky tell us no dreaming is ever too high. Dare to climb boldly, brave that high peak. You'll never know failure if bravely you seek. Dare to be different, dare to be free, Dare to roam far like wind on the sea. Fly like a gull, soar high on the air. Be strong in your courage when others despair. Be strong in your courage when others despair.
Okay, my friends, if you have a question you didn't get to ask, I'm not going to run away, so feel free to ask me afterwards, but I'd like to honor time, and time is done. Okay? Sleep well, everyone. See you tomorrow.